We've seen short discussions of eugenics, which Glover defined as general policies aimed at breeding patterns or patterns of survival of people with different genes. In short, eugenics is determining who breeds with whom. The reason why people often reject the possibility of genetic engineering, as soon as it's described as eugenics, is that eugenics has such a checkered past. Infamously, the Nazis practiced a form of eugenics, and the form in which they practiced it was especially corrupt. But the history of eugenics is not corrupt from beginning to end, and there is no one official program of eugenics that we can point to and say that it represents eugenics best. In fact, as Buchanan and others state, the time period from 1870 to 1950 saw various and differing forms of and programs for eugenics. In order to be able to make a justifiable determination about eugenics, we have to know exactly what it is, and not possibly distorted and mishandled versions of it. We can see from the discussion in Buchanan et al. That eugenics began from several clearly problematic stances. First, the practitioners held class biases in the form of beliefs that individuals in the upper classes were better stock than those of the lower classes. Second, they held racial biases because they believed that some races were inherently more intelligent and desirable, and that mixing of races would weaken the gene pool. Third, they were strong nationalists, which meant that they believed that the strength of their own nations would suffer if they didn't take steps to preserve the bloodlines of their countries. There was a group who advocated eugenics practices in the name of reform, rather than the causes of social, racial, or national purity, but even these seem to hold the same biases, even if implicit. We can see these biases at their peaks in the Nazi eugenics program. There were both positive and negative eugenics policies. On the one hand, there were laws forbidding sexual relations and reproduction between Aryans and Jews, and forced sterilizations. And on the other hand, there were euthanasia programs for the sick and enfeebled, and eventually programs of execution for those thought to be impure. The quotes around euthanasia are there because it was always involuntary, and for reasons other than the welfare of the patients. There was no sense of a good death in these acts. Buchanan et al. Also highlight two main tenets of past eugenics: degeneration and heritability of behavioral traits. They believed that it was possible to create less perfect specimens when one loses various kinds of purity, usually racial purity, and they believed that traits such as talents, proclivities, and dispositions pass from parent to child. Science has proven both of these tenets to be false. We have a full case discussion of how eugenics was practiced in the U.S. with Gould's article on Carrie Buck, which we'll talk about in class. The authors say that even as eugenics of the past was based on pseudoscience, bias, bigotry, and racism, this doesn't necessarily show that eugenics itself is wrong. It may have been practiced and misapplied by already morally questionable people. In order to determine whether eugenics itself is wrong, we can look at 5 possible reasons why it might be wrong. I will mention them here, and we will discuss them in full in class. Number 1, we should be trying to heal those with health conditions, not prevent or replace their very existences. Number 2, eugenics assumes a stable list of valuable characteristics when, in fact, there is a plurality of valuable characteristics. 3, eugenics of the past violated reproductive freedoms. 4, it gives the state too much control over our lives. 5, it's unjust to individuals. Given all of these concerns, we might ask whether any of them necessarily follows from eugenics in any of its various forms. Further, we might ask whether eugenics would be morally permissible if each of these objections were answered in the course of constituting the policies.